Hello again, me Anne Diamond here with you on another fantastic Thursday here on Viking.TV. And this week on Viking.TV, we're looking at music. Now, if you ever come to Oxford, you are exploring a city absolutely brimming with history. Have a look at this. Oxford is, of course, known to many as the city of dreaming spires and such an inspiration for movie makers. This is, for instance, where Alice discovered Wonderland, where Philip Pullman wrote Northern Lights, where C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien dreamed up stories in their favourite pub called the Eagle and Child. There it is. And where ancient and modern scholars of the oldest university in the world have always made their extraordinary mark. Now, if you do come, and many people may get the chance to come as a sort of extension to a Viking cruise, you must go to Evensong. Choose the cathedral, built, of course, by Cardinal Wolsey in the time of Henry VIII. And there you can still hear one of the best choirs in the world, a choir that's been singing there for well over 400 years. Listen to this. Take it from me, it's a wonderful experience. And for the boys of the choir, well, they go to a little boarding school just across the road, and they process to the cathedral every morning in their funny little Tudor hats and capes. And then they go for evening for practice, and again every night for evensong, every Sunday morning for matins and Eucharist and evensong again, and lots of Easter Sundays and always Christmas Day. It is a dedication. Well, my guest today certainly knows a lot about dedication. He is the man who has nurtured and, if you like, curated the musical heritage of Oxford's Christ Church Cathedral for the last 35 plus years. He has been the top man of the music faculty at Oxford University, and I'm proud to say I've known him since my own school days. He is Professor Stephen Darlington, MBE, and one of the leading choral conductors of the world. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, it's lovely to be talking to you. Now, after all of that build-up, I have to tell everybody that you retired recently. After years and years of that discipline that I mentioned there, the calendar discipline of having to be there every day on Sundays, Christmas days and everything like that. How does it feel then to be retired and no longer held to that calendar?
Well, I have to say it was quite strange initially, but the great thing about music, of course, is that you can carry on doing musical things, you know, beyond the routine. But you are right that this daily grind, some would say, but for me, it was just a delight doing it, was quite tough, very exhausting, but so rewarding, fantastic. And in many ways, I miss it.
Well, that's what my next question was, do you miss that sort of daily feed of music? I know from being a choir mother myself and going in just for the period of time that my boys were with you in the choir, that there's something about it, and I do miss it very badly. So it's a bit of a silly spiritual question to ask so early on in an interview. But what do you think that daily feed of music does for you inside the soul, if you like?
Well, I think it was an extraordinary thing. It's quite hard to put into words, but there was something about being quiet in that wonderful building, as you rightly say, literally every day of my working life, which recharged the batteries. And I guess you might have felt that too, coming to some of those services and hearing the music wash over you. And even for those of us who are actually performing it, where inevitably your focus and your concentration is on the technical side of, you know, whether it's going to be good or not. Even for those of us doing that, it was still very uplifting and actually, I would say, almost always uplifting. When it wasn't, it was only because there was some minor thing that had gone wrong, which, you know, when you look back on it, never really had much significance at all. It had a lot of significance at the time.
I think that's a lovely phrase when you say you let it wash over you. It is almost like bathing in it as well. It's a wealth of, and how many of us in a normal everyday life ever get to sit still for that long and just listen? Not many now. I bet you don't now as well.
No, I don't. No, you're quite right.
I wanted to ask you about Christmas, because Christmas is such an enormous time in most people's calendars, actually. And you have to choose the music to do every Christmas. And I can't imagine a worse political minefield, because everybody's got their own view of Christmas music. So how do you choose the music you're going to showcase in those particularly important services?
Well, when I was younger in my career, I had all these ambitions for commissioning lots of new music, contemporary music, and use this opportunity when you had a very large audience, probably the biggest one that one ever gets during the church's year, to promote contemporary music. I learnt quite early on that what people want at Christmas time is a sense of sitting in a comfortable armchair and familiarity. And whilst you could slip in a few contemporary pieces, on the whole, I decided not to do that because it never went down terribly well. So for me, there was always a framework of familiar carols, you know, In Dulce Jubilo and all those sorts of things. Tomorrow Shall Be My Dancing Day, those well-known carols. But then I would try each year to put in one or two that were slightly less familiar, but always quite accessible.
Did anyone ever have a go at you? I mean, or did you always have to consult the higher ups in the church that this is what you were going to do? This is your menu of Christmas music. And I'm sure so many had a view.
Yeah, well, by and large, I was very lucky at Christ Church and before that at St Albans, because people didn't interfere with me very much. The clergy didn't interfere, although I had quite a lot of trouble with one carol by Benjamin Britten called the Shepherd's Carol, which is to words by W.H. Auden. And the first line of the words are, "Oh, lift your little pinky and touch the winter sky." Pinky being a little finger, of course. Yeah. And I had quite a few complaints from people about that one. And over the years, of course, I did get a number of complaints. You can guess why. Over the years, I had quite a few complaints from people when I did do contemporary music. I remember once doing a Radio 3 broadcast of a new work, and I got a letter from somebody afterwards which read something like, "Those of us who are trying to promote the cause of English church music have a difficult job as it is, without people like you broadcasting cacophonous rubbish like that."
Yes, I can see that, as I said, politically very difficult at Christmas.
Yeah.
And we all have our own view. You mentioned there, "Tomorrow Will Be My Dancing Day." I think that's my favourite that you guys have ever done. But In Dulce Jubilo, I managed to find a really short clip for everybody to enjoy. This is Christ Church Choir singing In Dulce Jubilo. I mean, really, it's just fabulous. And you can see that the whole atmosphere there, the cathedral and the candles and everything, that's what people want to see at Christmas. I was just thinking that, you have had your own family, obviously, all grown up now, but just recently giving up your choir family, was that like losing a whole, access to another family, or what?
Yes, it was, actually, because what I've really enjoyed throughout my career is working with young people, whether they are children singing in these choirs or whether they're students. And so they are part of one's family. And since I saw them every single day, I got very used to all their little foibles and quirks. No doubt they would say the same about me, I'm quite sure.
My boys used to say, "Don't annoy Dr. Darlington because he'll throw a hymn book at you." Sorry about that.
No, thank you for mentioning that publicly. I may have done that once or twice, but obviously my skills were so bad I never actually hit anybody.
Oh, yes.
Deliberate.
I was going to say another thing I was always told is that the choir are wonderful at singing, but not so good at cricket. So maybe your overhand that good. So it is an extraordinary thing you're going through, actually giving up all those those years, as I said, of curating that music. When you took on the job, did you have to be aware of the history of the job? I mean, so many people over hundreds of years have done that job before you. You are taking on quite a legacy, aren't you?
Yes, you're right about that. And of course, I was a student at Christ Church in the early 1970s. So I was organ scholar with Simon Preston, who was the most brilliant musician, who had the job, that I then went on to get myself. And so I knew from the inside quite a lot about how it worked and the history of the place. But you said earlier on that there's been a tradition of singing music there which goes back about 400 years, and that's true. And it's quite a responsibility to know that you're the custodian of that tradition. And my intention was to, as it were, try to build on everything that had gone before. And of course, in the past, you didn't have so many recordings and media in the way that you have these days. So it was that was an area which I was able to develop quite a lot when I was running a choir.
Well, you must have learned to love the place when you were a student, but particularly in your job. It is the most extraordinary place to see, Christ Church, isn't it? What do you know of the history? It was, I mean, the cathedral itself was built by Cardinal Wolsey, but he was intending it to be the Cardinal's College, wasn't he? Something like that?
That's right, yes. He founded it in 1525 to be Cardinal College. That's what it was called. And as far as what is now the cathedral is concerned, this building was the priory church of St. Friedeswald. And in order to create that huge quad, which is the largest quad in Oxford, he knocked down 2 bays of the church in order to make that. And that's why Christ Church Cathedral is so particularly small, because it's not really a full-length building. And then and he recruited a composer or director of music called John Taverner. And interestingly, Taverner was not the first person who was offered the job. There was a man called Hugh Aston who was offered the job first, but he said no because he had a better deal in Leicester, which is where he was at the time. And Taverner, who was in Lincolnshire, Tattershall in Lincolnshire, he also turned it down the first time because I think the quote is something like he was in the way of a good marriage. In other words,
of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, don't they say of Cardinal Wolsey, it was very unusual because he did fall out with Henry VIII. It was very unusual for anyone in his sort of business at the time to actually die in bed, but he did.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
He died in his own time, even though he had fallen out of favour in the end.
I know. Well, Taverner, who eventually came to Christ Church to run the music, the inducement was he got a salary of £10 a year. Plus extras. But what he did have was a fantastic choir, which was that he was able to be involved in the recruitment of that choir. It had 16 boy choristers, just like it is now. Incredible.
Well, exactly. I mean, things haven't changed that much, although anyone watching right now might well recognise the Great Hall in Christ Church because it is the Harry Potter Hall now. And of course, a lot of the choristers must get very excited about that because they sing occasionally, they sing grace there. They must get very excited that feels like the Harry Potter Hall.
Yes, they do. I don't know if your boys ever told you about singing at the Gaudy dinners and the strawberries and cream that they always had afterwards and all that stuff. Or maybe they kept quiet about that. I don't know. But there was a great thrill for them, the choristers going into that building, which they can do more or less any time if they want to. But for these big occasions, and the tables are all highly decorated and everybody's dressed up, and then they get to sing. And you know, on a couple of occasions during my time when the Queen came, you know, to visit, they were doing that also. So that's very special memory, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it's always mindful of the history that's gone before you. So when you take on the job, what are your obligations, both professionally and personally? Because it's not just the sort of choir calendar and the church calendar I'm thinking about, but you go on massive tours with the choir as well, don't you? All over the world.
Yes, well, when I took on the job, because it's a dual role, the director of music at Christ Church, because I was also a university lecturer in music. So the interview panel consisted of representatives of the Faculty of Music of University Academic Music Department, as well as clergy and members of Christ Church. So it was quite a large group of people. And so I had as far as the university was concerned, I had obligations to lecture and teach students and examine and all of that stuff. And then what you're really asking, which is about the cathedral, when I was appointed in the mid 1980s, I remember the then dean saying to me, "I hope you won't be bothering with all this recording and touring stuff," I think is what he said, "because you don't really need to be doing that, because you're at Christ Church now, you've hit the pinnacle, just stay here and do the daily services." Yeah. It just shows you how the world has changed, doesn't it? Because, I mean, obviously, I didn't pay any attention to that because, you know, I had all sorts of ambitions to do the tours and to do the recordings. And in my time, we went all over the world, you know. So I don't remember where your boys went, but we went to the USA probably once every 2 or 3 years, South America, Brazil twice, China 3 times, Australia, pretty well every European country, Japan. Anyway, we went all over the place.
Yeah, and the boys always loved it. My guys went to Buenos Aires, I remember that, and the States, and sometimes they stay with families, so they get experiences they would never get in any other way. But they do love the singing. We've got some pictures here of your 2018 tour in China, I think, and then you went on to do Bermuda, where it looks as though they had I mean, you clearly have to make sure they have a fabulous time too. So their downtime, and so many photographs are of them eating all the time. The downtime has to be pretty fun as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I suppose that is a decision that I made, because I think that, you know, after all, we were being paid a lot of money and entirely funded by the host organisations to go to these places. And singing in Sydney Opera House or places like that, it wasn't much use turning up to do a concert, you know, in a place, in a full concert hall, and just say, "Oh, well, I'm awfully sorry, the boys stayed up half the night having a party, so it won't be very good today." So, you know, there was a matter of balance involved. On the other hand, I've always thought that children, in fact adults as well, sing much better if they are relaxed. You know, because it's such a physical thing, singing, isn't it? And actually, so you need to do what you can to reduce tension, so you get that kind of you know, focused approach that you get in sport. You know, where people have got very finely tuned bodies, and you know, when they come up to serve, they actually don't miss the ball because they're so tense.
That's right. Well, yes, and frankly, the best voices are happy voices, aren't they? But you did do some concerts in the most unlikely of places. I managed to find this amazing video. I think it was either shot by a parent or an onlooker, of you guys at the airport gate at London's Heathrow Airport. I think either you must be waiting to go off on a tour. What happened here? Because you gave an impromptu concert. Before we hear it, tell us how it happened in the first place. Do you even remember it?
Yeah, well, I'm trying very hard to remember, because there were a number of these impromptu events. Funny enough, I was reminiscing yesterday with there was a boy in the choir who was particularly enterprising, who I discovered on one of the tours was going around the sweet shops with 3 or 4 of his mates and offering to sing Close Harmony, which he'd arranged, in return for mounds of sweets, which they were willingly given. But as far as the airport's concerned, I think I do remember this, because we the travel agent who booked the flights had got some sort of discount with whatever airline it was, and I think there were personal contacts. He had personal contacts with the airline, and one of the deals was that we would just do something in the departure lounge. If that's the excerpt that you've got.
Well, let's see. Let's play it now. It's an absolutely delightful rendition of "Steal Away" at the airport gate. Have a look.
Right.
There you are. I know the sound quality isn't as brilliant as we would love it to be, but that's obviously amateur footage of just caught at the moment. But it looks as though it was tremendous fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the most noticeable thing is the colour of my hair, which dates it about 25 years ago. But, you know, I still can't remember what airport that was. It might have been in one of the hub airports in the States, but I think you're probably right. It was at Heathrow. I'm sure I'm right about my my comment about the airline. That's why we did it.
No, well, it was part of a deal. You never know. You've been to some amazing places at amazing times as well. I mean, I wish I could show everybody, but if they go on YouTube, they'll be able to find it. The concert you did in Prague just after the fall of communism there, it was 1990 then, and it was the first real big deal celebration of Christmas that the local people had been able to do. And you were there with a cast of thousands, weren't you?
We were. It's incredible. And I'm not sure, I mean, we knew it was historic when we were there, but it's only in retrospect that as time has gone on, I've realized what an incredible event it was, because we persuaded by his agent, Placido Domingo, to come and sing. And a wonderful Romanian soprano, Ileana Corchubaș. And the orchestra that I had was entirely formed of players who had refused to join the Communist Party and therefore were not able to join the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra. So they were very, very good players, and they formed themselves into a chamber orchestra, you know, almost immediately after the fall of communism. So there was a great spirit of optimism in the place, and President Havel had just been elected, and he was sitting just behind me in this, as you say, vast audience who came in for this televised program, this televised concert that we did. So it's something I will never forget. Incredible.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, as I say, if people are very keen to watch it, it's there on YouTube. If you just put in Christ Church Cathedral Choir, Prague, 1990 or whatever, you get the whole thing, and it is the most amazing. And as you say, when you look back on it now, you realise how incredibly historic and important it was. What about touring again? How do you feel really about parents? I mean, parents of your boy choristers, do they get in the way? Do they make your life miserable, or do you understand?
Well, I'm a parent myself, and now a grandparent. So I think to answer the last point first, I definitely understand, and I always did. I don't know whether it felt like that to you as a parent. I think the it's a difficult balance to strike, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the children need to be able to focus, and they need to feel that they've done their best, as they would in any other area of their lives, really. And I keep thinking about sport as an analogy. So it's not great if you're I don't know, if you're playing in the football team, you're in goal, and your mum is just behind the goalkeeper and say, "Save it, save it," just when you're actually trying to focus on watching the ball. So I think, I suppose, if I was honest, I took a fairly arm's length approach to it all, but that was not because I didn't love talking to parents, and because of that. It was more because my job was to focus on the children. And I guess for me, it wasn't just about trying to get the best musical results, which is obviously really important for musicians at my sort of level, but also trying to find a way of enabling them to, as it were, take away all sorts of skills which hopefully they can use in their later lives. And part of that is being independent. So, that's a sort of difficult question to answer. But I think when I found whenever I got too close to parents, it was a bit of a mistake. If you see what I mean, it wasn't helpful to their children if I did that.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, isn't it? But as far as the boys enjoying their time in the choir, it's proven time and time again by how many of them come back and sing as men in the choir. You've got quite a few in your time. You've had quite a few.
Yes, that's true. And I mean, on that one, I think, of course, there are a lot more who've gone off to sing in other places. And actually, I think I used to try to dissuade former choristers from applying to come back to Christ Church as adult singers, not because I wasn't fond of them and didn't want to come back because they weren't very good. It was not that. It was just that I thought for them their own development, it was better if they had other influences. And I'm not sure how healthy it is, when you go back to where you were. I mean, I did it myself in my own career. I was a student at Christ Church, and then I came back. Perhaps I feel that was rather different. But I think when children are developing and they're turning into young adults and teenagers and so on, it's good for them to have other influences. So, but you are right. Quite a few did come back over the years.
What is your view of child singing stars? You never wanted, did you, to enter any of your very talented choristers into any of these choir competitions? You preferred that they, I don't know, kept a level head, I suppose, about these things.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure there are some who can cope with that kind of adulation when they're youngsters, but I think it obviously applies an awful lot of pressure to them and to their families too. And I tended to apply that same approach even when it came to singing solos in the choir, just on a routine basis. I tried not to always have, the one obvious star soloist, if you like, but to try to spread the solos around to the others, because if you're part of a team, it's very important that you feel valued, and that your contribution is important. Although everybody understands, I mean, again, it's just like in a sport, isn't it? Everybody understands that Ronaldo is the fantastic footballer, and that they're probably never going to be quite as good. But, in order for the team to win the match, they've all got to play well, haven't they? So it's the same with singing.
You've had one or two Ronaldos, though, in your time, haven't you? I'm thinking particularly of the recordings you've done for the Vicar of Dibley, for instance. And I'm sure there are a lot of people watching right now, American people included, who know the Vicar of Dibley very well. And of course, the opening music is something that your choir sang. And the opening music features one of your soloists, young George.
George, yeah. Yes. Well, that was almost the first thing I did with my friend Howard Goodall, when over the years we have recorded a lot of Howard's music, and I don't think when they started that film series they realized that what a hit it was going to be. And I mean, it's still repeated over and over again, isn't it, all over the world. But there's quite a funny story about that, because they released that theme tune as a single, and the then regime at Christ Church were not happy about being associated with this comedy show, so they wouldn't let us use the name Christ Church Cathedral Choir on the credits. So if you look at the first versions, you'll see that the credit says George and the choir.
My goodness.
I know, but it didn't really, thereafter it was, it was fine, and our name was credited, but it was quite amusing. And on that CD single, it says George and the choir.
That just shows, that sort of illustrates the political tightrope you have to walk every so often. You're dealing with church and the big outer world and the media and everything. Yeah, fascinating. I've got a lovely little video here. Again, I think it was taken by parents. We were talking about the choir going off on tour and occasionally singing at the airport gate somewhere. But when they come back, of course, they are, the boys particularly, are little boys who just want to see their mums and dads again. And of course, a crowd of mums and dads who have come very, very early to the airport to pick up their children. I just thought this was a delightful insight into what it's really like being part of that choir family. Let's have a look at this.
Yeah.
Were you worried about the shower? And the parents are here at 5:30 a.m. to wait for their children. Bye-bye. And the parents are here at 5:30 a.m. Hey, stay. Let us stay. Ni hao, ni hao. Ni hao. Ni hao. Doing the vlog. We end with the hug. Hug your mum again. Oh, all the family.
Mrs. Scott, hopeless. Terror. Oh, you got me all.
And of course, not only do you sing all over the world, but you've sung in some extraordinary settings in Britain. For instance, you've got some nice shots of you singing in Blenheim Palace, which were, what an extraordinary setting to sing in. And then there was a lovely photograph at the end of this as one of your choristers up against the guard soldiers at Blenheim. And that, look at that, that's a picture worth saving, the family album. You said earlier you want to pay lip service, obviously, to the history of your job, of the vast array of music that's ever been sung there at Christ Church, but also trying to be modern. Very, very difficult tightrope to walk. But you mentioned there Howard Goodall, Vicar of Dibley, and a lot of his modern music. So you're involved very much in trying to blend both together. Are there, when you are working at the university, you must have some of the most gifted young students in the world. That's why they come to Oxford to read music. Are there any geniuses in the offing?
I think probably there are geniuses in every generation in a way. And over the years I had, as you say, so many really bright and talented students. For example, these days everybody uses for music processing software called Sibelius. I don't know if you've heard of that. Well, that was invented by Jonathan Finn, who was a student reading music at Christ Church, one of my students. I hasten to add, if he ever saw this interview, that I have nothing to do with the development of the software. All I can claim to do is that I admitted him into the college and allowed him to spend a lot of his time with his twin brother developing this. They sold the company many years ago, but that would be one example of people who just, you would have to say genius is pretty well what that is, I think. Extraordinary, clever.
Wow. As you say, everybody.
But amongst the students, many, of course, have gone into musical careers, but there are others who've done other sorts of things. One of my former students runs the San Francisco Opera House. And there are plenty who've become lawyers and administrators and all sorts of careers, actually. But happily, quite a few who are also in the music business.
Well, of course, when I knew you, when we were both extremely young, you were a great pianist. That's how I knew you. And you still are, obviously, playing the piano. You prepared a little piece for us on the piano so that we could just relax back in this week of music that we're celebrating and just listen to you. What are you playing for us in this?
It's a slow movement of Mozart's 23rd piano concerto, which I think everyone will recognize. I just play it sometimes because Mozart's my favorite composer and it calms me down.
Well, let's hope it does it for all of us. Let's have a listen. Oh, Stephen, that was lovely. Can I ask you, what's more nerve-wracking, playing or conducting in front of an audience?
Well, generally playing, I would say. Yes, that wasn't the case earlier in my career, but these days it is. Although, when you're conducting, I think the stakes are higher because you are reliant on a lot of other people. So you might have your vision of how you want the music to sound, but if somebody faints on the stage, there's not a lot you can do about that, is there?
No, at least you've got your back to the audience when you're conducting.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, although you can generally sense whether they're enjoying it or not.
Or just by the rustling and the movement behind you.
Something to do with atmosphere. It's hard to put one's finger on it, but I think you can feel that.
I've got a lovely video here showing how you take a bow. I think the choir was singing in Boston. And I've put together a few bits and pieces that were actually filmed by either local people who were very, very thrilled to hear you. And then one of your gentlemen of the choir was filming backstage. I just thought it was very funny because I've always wondered how you learn to take a bow like a conductor's bow, and you clearly enjoy it. Let's just have a little look at this because it just gives us an inside view on what it's like to be you. There you are, what it's like to take a bow, come off, and then decide you're going to go on for another bow.
Yes. Hopefully several times.
Yes, hopefully many times. Now, look, we've seen and heard what we can expect of the sort of musical excellence at Oxford, but could we sit back, perhaps, and hear a choir boy at his best? Who have you got for us?
Well, this last couple of years, I've been working with the choristers of Worcester College in Oxford as a sort of stopgap, post-retirement stopgap. And this boy, Ivan, I think has a beautiful voice. And here he is singing some Handel.
Sure.
And that, of course, very famous, "He shall feed his flock" from the Messiah. And how old is Ivan?
He's 12, so he's just entering his last year in Christ Church Cathedral School.
And do many of your choristers go on to musical careers, or is that sort of it?
Well, quite a few do, but by no means all. But I think the important thing is that most of them seem to have really valued the 5 years or so that they spend in the choir, and they've learnt lots of, they call them transferable skills, don't they? That you know, being part of a team, aspiring to high standards, confidence of singing in front of, you know, very large numbers of people, or doing recordings, or being on TV, or all that kind of stuff. And I mean, these are all really useful skills to have in life in general. But quite a few do end up in musical careers in one way or another, either as instrumentalists or as singers.
Have you calculated, since you retired, have you calculated how many choristers, actually members of the choir generally, have gone through your hands, as it were?
Well, with the choristers, it was well over 100, because I did do that calculation. And the students was a similar sort of number, I think. And by student, I kind of include the choral scholars, you know, the adult singers who sing on the back row of the choir in that list. So yes, hundreds. It's really what it is. And I'm actually in touch with quite a few of them.
Yes, or I think a lot of them like to keep in touch with you a bit. I mean, you're retired, but you're not old. Of course, neither of us are. Would you have lived your life any other way? Or when you look back on it, was it the perfect life for you? And what do you plan to do in your retirement?
Well, as far as whether I'd have lived my life differently, I think I've been very, very lucky. I think earlier on you mentioned something about how wonderful it was to be able to go into a building, you know, a glorious building every day of one's life and call it work. You know, that's amazing. And I worked in, I was at school in Worcester. I worked in Canterbury, where I was at the cathedral for a few years, and then St Albans, where I ran the music in the cathedral, then back in Oxford. I mean, these are all wonderful places. And so I don't think I would have done anything differently. I mean, we can all look back, can't we, and think of incidents in one's life that, you know, you would have hoped would have turned out differently. But in very broad terms, I've been very, very lucky. And, you know, it was, if I look back on it, it was a dream to do the job that I did.
And in such an amazing place. I mean, no matter what you think, Oxford is an extraordinary place. What do you like about it? Do you think you'll stay?
Yes, we'll definitely stay, because we have so many friends here. And, you know, you asked what I'm doing in retirement, and, you know, I'm doing quite a lot of conducting. I would have been doing a lot overseas in the last year, but of course that all rolled over to next year. So hopefully in 2022, those dates will come up again. And I'm doing a fair amount of lecturing, and you know, I went to Finland to give a series of lectures on Sibelius, and I was adjudicating an amazing festival called the World Peace Choral Festival a couple of months ago, which is based in Vienna. I must say, some of these choirs from all over the world, it's just extraordinary. Not just the standard, but also the number of young people who are involved in singing. It's fantastic. So what I want to do in the next few years, when I've still got the energy, is to try to encourage that kind of climate of music making, and make those who are in positions of power understand the value of music in education primarily, but also in general for people's well-being and so on.
Yeah, just what we were saying earlier, isn't it? It's about feeding the soul. It does do something. We've got some questions from our viewers, which we go through, and then I think you've got an organ piece to play for us a bit later. But can we do the questions first?
Yeah.
From Len and Jen in Ontario. Is it very traumatic for boys when their voices break?
That's a very good question. I think for most of them it's not, because you know, a boy reaches a certain point where they're actually quite happy for their voice to break, because, you know, they see that that's happening to their peers, and they don't want to be different from their peers. However, I think there are some children for whom it needs to be dealt with very sensitively, because particularly those who have been outstanding soloists, when, you know, 1 minute you're singing on the stage of Sydney Opera House, and then, you know, a few weeks later you're sort of ogling like a Swiss yodeler, and you can't control it, and that's tough. So I just think my experience was that for some it was traumatic, and one just had to help them through that and make them realize that their voices would probably settle down in the future, and that there were other ways in which they could contribute.
And if a boy has valued his voice and loves singing, and then his voice breaks, is it 50-50, or what are the chances that he will go on to be a good singer when he's older, or do you just lose it? If you were a boy chorister with a good voice, it doesn't progress.
Well, I think it's 50-50. What you hope, though, is that what a professional like myself hopes is that you have the technical side of their singing has been taught in such a way that you haven't screwed up their voice, basically. And I think that is a development which has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, when people who have been directors of music in English cathedrals have become much more aware of the technical aspect of singing than they ever were 50 or more years ago. And I think there probably were quite a few children who had their voices wrecked by just not being handled properly in that way in the past.
Francine Sachs from London says, you sing the same music as they did 400 years ago, but do you think the sound is the same as in those olden days?
That's another very, very interesting question. You know, obviously we can't really know, because who's to say? I think I found doing the really difficult early music. We recorded a lot of music from the Eton Choir book, which is late 15th century music. And it's so complex, it's hard to imagine that the composers would have written music of this complexity knowing that the choir would not have been able to sing it. You see what I mean? So, you know, the sort of consequence of that argument is that actually they must have had virtuoso singers. Whether they sounded the same or not, I think is, you know, who's to say? I suspect that it was rather less pure than what we think of these days. The early music movement in vocal ensembles has emphasized, you know, purity of balance and tone and ensemble and all that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't have sounded as pure as that in those days. You know, I think it not least because it was just routine. They sang in these monastic foundations. They sang so much music every day. You know, first of all, I think there was probably a fair amount of improvisation that went on. And that you would have just, you know, oh, here we are, it's this piece again, and we'll, you know, embellish it a little bit. I think there would have been that. And also, I just think it's hard to imagine that it would have been somehow sanitized in the way that things have become these days. Part of that's to do with recordings, I think, actually.
But also, when you think about it, the average singer 400 years ago wouldn't have been as well nourished, probably not as big and strong as children and young men are today.
No, that's true. Although these choristers, you know, some of the early choristers at Cardinal College, they were headhunted. I keep coming back to football, but you know, I think perhaps to talk about cricket, but they were headhunted like sports stars. So there's a lovely tale of Henry VIII pinching a chorister who was, I'm just trying to remember in whose choir. I think it was a man called Piggott, Thomas Piggott, was involved in some way or another. But anyway, there's some correspondence in which the king was insistent that this child should come and sing in his choir. He was that good. So, and what they got, of course, they were properly fed and housed. And so that was the deal.
Well, there you go. Anthony Gibbons, who is your favourite composer? He says.
Mozart is my favourite composer.
But why?
Well, oh yes. Well, I think it's the drama that appeals to me. This extraordinary instinct for balance and I don't know, theatre in everything that he wrote. So it's not, you know, obviously I love the operas, but you can sense the operas in all the other music as well. And I mean, I'm not one of those who would say that, you know, Mozart never wrote a dull note, a dull piece. But when you look at the manuscripts and you see the speed with which he wrote, it just is outpouring. And I find it impossible to conceive that someone could have, you know, that mental agility to be able to do that and to be able to sort of think in not just in paragraphs, but in whole chapters when writing the music. But I just think it's glorious, absolutely glorious. And you may remember that every chorister who left Christ Church was given whatever score they asked for from me, which they also got as well. They always got a score by Mozart as well.
Oh, yes. You made a very big point of that. Lovell Young in Missouri says, you must have spent thousands of hours in cathedral services. Does the rest of your family get involved in that, or do they just see it as Dad's job?
Well, no, my wife, Moira, has been very supportive all my career, and, you know, has, when she could, has come to services a lot. And I mean, she had a career of her own as a, you know, she was a classicist and a very successful teacher. So she wasn't always able to come and support, but she did when she could. And well, we have 3 daughters, all of whom are musical and all of whom turned up quite a lot to the cathedral. But, you know, now they're all grown up and have their own lives. But they, I think, would say that they have a love of music. So I was very supported by my family. But, you know, they had independent lives too. So that's what you'd hope for, wouldn't you?
Respect all round, absolutely. I want to hear you play the organ now. What are you going to play for us?
So this is one of Bach's preludes and fugues. It's just the prelude I'm going to play. It's for those who are interested in catalogue numbers, it's BWV 541. But it's one of the livelier Bach preludes. And you asked me who my favourite composer is, and I said Mozart. But Bach comes a pretty close second to Mozart.
And where are you playing this organ? Where is this organ?
Well, this is Worcester College. It's one of my last things I was able to do in the college because I've now stopped working there. But I used that organ so I could play on a proper pipe organ.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is, Worcester College is one of the most beautiful colleges in Oxford. Very, very pretty. So if you can't get along to Christ Church, always go to Worcester and have a look too. But I'm going to say thank you very, very much, Stephen. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about your wonderful career and that amazing choir. And like I say to anyone watching at the moment who's never been to Oxford, it's still worth a visit, even if though you are not going to be there personally.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to speak to you.
It's been brilliant. Let's hear you playing the organ now at Worcester College. fantastic. That was Stephen Darlington. Next week, I meet a 3-star admiral of the US Navy, an acclaimed trauma surgeon, an expert in COVID health protocols, and now the Director of Health for Viking's return to sailing. That's Dr. Raquel Bono, or Rocky, as she used to be known in the Navy. She's an absolutely extraordinary person, and I know you're going to love meeting her and hearing her amazing backstory too. So that's next week. Until then, do keep safe and well, and enjoy the rest of Music Week here on Viking TV. Goodbye.